Good morning to everyone. My name is Jermaine Johnson. I'm the regional president for PNC Bank here in Greater Washington and also in Virginia. I want to welcome you here to PNC Place. This is our headquarters building, and it's really, really special because we're about to celebrate our 20th year here in the market. I don't know if most of you recall, but we bought Riggs back in 2005. This building looked nothing the way that it does today, by the way. If you go outside and you see that red brick building, the building that we're in now looked a lot like that. But of course, we've had several upgrades since then. So we're happy to have you here this morning and happy to kick things off. Doug, I want to thank you for the partnership that we've had with Leadership Greater Washington. I understand that every year is the best year for LGW. You're definitely the best, and we're really happy to be a part of this Lessons in Leadership platform. This is something we've done for a long time. Today happens to be our last series. Today is our last event of the year, and so I'm very excited to have Dr. Jones here with us. And why don't we go ahead and get things kicked off? I thought, how was Thanksgiving? I want to know, were you here, that you celebrate here at home, that you go back home? I understand Arkansas is your home base. I think you've been here since 2017, 2018. Would love to hear how your Thanksgiving was and whether or not you stayed local.
Yeah, so my grandkids are both in Seattle, so we made the trek out to Seattle. I made a couple of great decisions, like flying to Seattle to see my grandkids, and a couple of bad ones. So, for example, the night before Thanksgiving, we took the grandkids while my son and daughter-in-law went away for a romantic weekend or evening away, and we decided that shawarma would be a good pre-Thanksgiving dinner. That was a bad idea. Food poisoning later, really, really sick. We made it back here on Saturday, so it was great. The other bad decision I made was on Thanksgiving morning when we woke up, the 3.5-year-old and a 1-year-old, and so we start hearing the whining and crying. So my wife goes up to get the 3.5-year-old, who usually whines more than the 1-year-old. And I made the decision to take the 1-year-old, but what I'd forgotten is that the 1-year-old had been on antibiotics for an ear infection. So I woke up to a surprise that was not good on Thanksgiving. So that was my Thanksgiving.
And how was Seattle? Was the weather?
It was actually
good?
not, it was not too much
like
different
this?
from this. Not a drop of rain, believe it or not.
Okay.
Blessing.
All right. Well, welcome back home. Glad to hear you had a good Thanksgiving. I thought, so I've met you now, it's been a couple times. You were introduced to the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority with Victor Hoskins, of which I'm a commissioner. If I remember correctly, when they introduced you as Stephen Jones, but not Dr. Jones. Like, what do you prefer, Dr. Jones, Stephen Jones?
It depends on setting. If I'm with a patient who has cancer and they need to know they can trust the word I'm giving, then that's good. But most of the folks at Inova know me as Stephen, and that's been pretty intentional.
And what about when you go back to Arkansas?
I don't go back to Arkansas. Not a statement. We moved my mom here about 2 years ago, and so there really is nothing back there for me to go back to.
And when you say it's intentional, why would it be intentional for folks to refer to you as Mr. Jones versus Dr. Jones in your current capacity?
No, to Stephen. I actually
Stephen.
don't like Mr. Jones.
Okay.
When people say that, I actually know that they don't actually know who I am. But Stephen, I'm very comfortable with. I think that as CEO of the organization, it's important for people to understand that the person is a person, and it's someone that they want to have be in the organization, have a relationship with. So I'm very intentional of. I don't pull the Dr. Jones really ever,
So maybe that takes us back to your beginnings.
But on a leadership development standpoint, there are times though. So if I were to go to the Hill, then other than our own senators or representatives who I already have a relationship with, I am Dr. Jones. They need to know that that person in that role it's not the person, it really is that title. At certain times like that, I think you have to also recognize.
I do the same in my job. Sometimes I'm just Jermaine, other times I'm regional president. So yeah, I totally understand, depending on the room, depending on the audience. So maybe take us back a little bit, because I keep trying to take you back to Arkansas. I'm just curious.
It's like
we,
a country
we don't
song
hear
or
a lot of
something.
folks. I mean, we get a lot of folks here in Washington D.C. that are from all over the world. Other than one of our presidents who was from Arkansas, it's not usual that we hear that state oftentimes. And I'm just curious about your upbringing. I read that you described yourself as a son of farmers and of educators.
Mm-hmm.
And so, tell me a bit about your upbringing. Maybe a little bit about mom and dad.
Yeah, so my great-grandfather founded a business in Arkansas in 1929, a huge farm. In 1929, you remember, was not the best time to start a business. But they survived, and so we were massively affluent by the time that I was born, meaning we were dirt poor. And so as a kid on a farm in Arkansas, there are limited options to get out. Even if you're a smart kid and you work hard, you can become a teacher, or as it turns out, you can go to medical school. And so my mother actually inspired me to make that choice. There were a number of other things that I considered, including being a writer, which I still enjoy, by the way. But to make a decision to get off the farm, there weren't a lot of options out there. So I'd like to, say that I was that person who, watched Marcus Welby, or I had family members who were in healthcare. No, we didn't. The only time I saw a doctor was when something bad happened and I needed stitches, and literally it wasn't for medication, it was for stitches. That was the only thing that we saw a doctor for.
And your mom, sounds like she had a great influence over you following the pursuit of becoming a doctor. What exactly did she say to you, and she was a teacher?
She was a teacher, fourth grade teacher. Went back to school to become a teacher after my parents were divorced pretty early in life, and that was kind of a really meaningful moment for me, because I, at the age of about 10, was kind of, quote, the man of the house. Don't mean that to be sexist, but it was just the function of that was thrust into more maturity than I needed to be at that point. She had a college or a high school degree, so she went back and became a teacher, again, the only way to make a living at that point in time. So when I was in college and thinking about things, I thought about being a writer again. It just kind of came naturally to me. I still write. I still am an editor of a medical journal for one more year, and then they'll kick me off at time out. So I could be a writer. Actually, it was right after Watergate, not too long after Watergate. So, being a reporter was pretty sexy back then. As we know, that's kind of evolved, and it's not quite what it was back then. So my mother, so I was good at both science and relatively good with people. And my mother said, with that combination, why don't you just go to medical school? And indeed, that literally turned it.
But somewhere in between there, you studied zoology. You were an undergraduate zoology student. I'm going to assume that had something to do with your farmer's background, maybe or maybe not. I mean, I got to.
I'm waiting to see where he goes with this.
I got to. Well, I've been waiting to see where you were going to go with it. Actually, I've been waiting for you to. I'd love for you to unwrap that for me a little bit in terms of that pursuit.
So actually, the root word zoo, or zoo as it's pronounced in the scientific term, is animal, and so it's basically the study of animals. But there's lots of study of animals, including every person in this room right here is an animal. So zoology is actually not a rare pre-med type major. I happen to, for whatever reason, I get these weird things that I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed anatomy. For some reason, when I was in high school, I just connected with anatomy. It was just like art to me. And so when I got, let's see, a few nods here. And so just that fact that I enjoyed anatomy made zoology, I could have been a chemistry major, physics, or other things. But that understanding of that animal body or the human body just really resonated with me.
And was there an animal body that most is like a human, or is there something through zoology that you ultimately decided that this is the path? Because you're a urological doctor by trade. I'm just curious. Again, I'm trying to follow the path myself, because you have like 4 or 5 different degrees. Zoology, you've got a graduate school degree, you've got you're an MBA, urological student. Again, just trying to figure out exactly where that path, how you got on the path that you're on, and where you landed today.
Yeah, I think so. Just getting a medical school was the first step. And so when I first went to medical school, I was a small town kid. I was going to be just a small town family doctor in the middle of nowhere. People would pay me with pies and chickens and stuff like that. I was naive. I was a farm kid, okay? And so first 2 years of medical school, in fact, I was on a scholarship that allowed poor kids with no resources to go into family medicine. And in my third year, so the first years of medical school are really all classroom stuff, chemistry and all this. And then you really finally start seeing patients in your third year. And so the first, by coincidence, I started on surgery. Could have been OB, it could have been other places, but I started on surgery. And at noon that day, I called my soon-to-be future ex-wife and told her, I'm going to do this. Because the minute I got in the operating room, that anatomy just spoke to me. And I said, I will be a surgeon. I don't know what kind yet. There's lots of different types of surgery. I will be a surgeon and never waver from that. And so the reason for urology is in medicine, there's certain types of DNA. When I meet a physician, I can usually tell you the one or two specialties that they might be in, and I'll be amazingly accurate. And by the way, I'm not special. Every doctor can do this. There's just a different personality. And so when I met the urologist, they were like me. They like to have fun. They like to work hard. They focused on getting it right and doing it with excellence, but they were just a pretty fun group of people that wanted to enjoy their day, and I wanted to enjoy my day. So that's why I wanted to be like those folks, and I became a urologist. And yes, back in that day, they were all guys. Now probably 40% of urology residents, if not 50%, are women. But back then, it was just all a male-dominated specialty.
Interesting. And you also specialize in oncology. And I read that one of your first patients was your grandfather. Tell us a little bit about what impact that experience had with you immediately when dealing with your grandfather, and then ultimately getting into the profession of healthcare.
Yeah, in fact, both of my paternal grandparents died of cancer. My grandmother had breast cancer. My grandfather had bladder cancer, which eventually became back around as a urologic cancer. So when I was after my freshman year of medical school, the American Cancer Society had these scholarships. So I could go back and carry hay bales on the farm, or I could follow around a doctor for 8 weeks. It was a pretty straightforward decision. Probably paid it better because it paid minimum wage all summer. And so I did that for 8 weeks, and spending that time both surgically and with medical oncology patients, I developed an appreciation for understanding the need that those individuals had and how it felt good to have an impact on people who really needed things. There are other specialties. Every specialty's got its value. There are other specialties that I didn't think I would get the deep meaning out of. I knew that in watching people like my own family suffer, hopefully sometimes recover, sometimes obviously not, that I knew that was meaningful work that I wanted to be part of. So in being in my grandfather, literally we're making rounds with Dr. Tranum, the person I had this internship with. We literally get to the next room. It's like, oh, this is Mr. Jones. Oh, well, as it turns out, that was my Mr. Jones, and he was weeks away from dying of metastatic bladder cancer. And the reason it applied to my career is that he, for years, had quote, little tumors floating in his bladder. And what's that really mean? They're really not floating. They're on pedicles, and you tend to have to cut them out. And so for the majority of patients who have that, you could almost call them benign tumors. The likelihood of them spreading is about 1%. And which is still real. My grandfather happened to be that 1%. But for most patients who get that, they're never going to die of it, which is great. Okay, and I saw thousands of those, probably hundreds of those patients in my career. But what that means is 1% of those patients do have something bad, and they are going to die. And so I became fascinated with, well, why did my grandfather go on, and we thought it was going to be fine until all of a sudden he's the guy on the third floor dying, whereas 99 other people's grandfathers actually continued to do fine. And it relates to some molecular changes in the cells that are beyond the science of this discussion. But later in my career, by 2002 or 3, 5 or 10 years in my career, I was doing research on molecular markers for bladder cancer. So if you could look at the chromosomes in those cells, you could tell that in specific ones, they already had the changes that weren't visible to the eye. There's no way clinically to see that, but if we knew that that was really going to make that tumor progress, maybe you treat that patient differently. And so we were able to then find patients who would have been my grandfather and died, but because we could identify the chromosomal changes, we could then, have more aggressive treatment, more aggressive surveillance, and occasionally, of course, take their bladder out if required. So it changed to where, that experience 15, 20 years later led to a research career in making an impact on patients and real outcome difference.
That's a great story. So from there, it led to you becoming research focused. You also became the operator for the hospitals for the Cleveland Clinic. Talk to us about that transition from a urological doctor to then all of a sudden wanting to run hospital systems.
Thinking about this conversation, it hit me the old Woody Allen, I think, is attributed. 90% is just showing up. And as you go through your career, my observation is that there were dozens of times where I just showed up. And, so I just initially went in private practice, just started treating patients, like any other doctor would. And then real early on, it was in the early stages of lasers in medicine, which now makes me sound really old because they've been around for a while. But at that point, I was literally the only person in my hospital who had trained on them because I just finished residency. So they needed somebody to start a laser program. So first year out of medical school, guess who's in charge of the laser program? I just showed up. And then different things got, someone would look around and go, who will do it? Ask Jones, he'll do it. And 4 years into practice, my senior partner, we had merged with the hospital. It was in the early days of, quote, vertical consolidation. My senior partner walked in, said a really bad word, and said, I'm not doing this anymore. And you look around, and of all the other urologists, they're like, well, I'm not doing it, and who else will do it? Well, okay. So I became a department chair at 35-ish, probably 36 years old, way before anyone should be a department chair in a large department. And, by far the youngest person in the room. But it forced me to grow up, not unlike being, the man of the house when you're about 10, forced me to kind of actually learn these things, how to manage, navigate a room full of people who are smarter than you and who have more experience than you. And then when I moved to Cleveland Clinic about a couple of years after that, just the same thing, just keep showing up. And at some point you look up and go, holy cow, you're running, a good part of this organization. So, but it's always tempting in your career to think, well, I don't want to take this other responsibility on. And that's a reasonable choice. But that choice always comes with, well, there's something that may not come out of that. The key to it, I think, is knowing which of those choices to take because you can't do them all. I got fortunate that a lot of those things that I was willing to take on eventually prepared me for other things that would come down the line.
So somewhere between there, you went from doing vasectomies to then getting your graduate degree. You attained your MBA at Case Western in Cleveland. Was that after you became the chair of the division that you were running, or was that before?
So I actually became vice chair first, which for anyone who knows medicine, vice chair is the worst job in healthcare. It means you make the call schedule, so you're the one telling all your partners who's going to be on call on Christmas and Thanksgiving and all that stuff. If nobody can take call, okay, guess who it's going to be? You're going to take it. But then when I became chair, my boss walked in my office one day and said, you're going to business school. I said, oh, yeah, we've been talking about that for a year or so. He goes like, no, like, you're going to business school. I've already called. You're walking over there today. And literally within 4 or 5 days, I was in business school. Now, I'd been thinking about it for a year. But business school for me was a real blessing because it taught me to think differently. And that's something I think is worth in any of the areas you're in. How you think and what you're doing, there are a lot of different ways to think. So when I got in business school, I went from everything's about that focus on that one individual patient to understanding there's a whole dynamic ecosystem out there that I never had to think about when I was just that person trying to advocate for one patient. So truly changed how I looked at whether it be how I navigated interactions, how I looked at making resource decisions, because there's never enough resources for everything. So that was really a big moment. And fortunately, my boss literally just said, you're doing it, you don't have any choice. Fortunately, my youngest kid had literally just started college the week before, so it was kind of a good time for me. But it threw me into, kind of threw me in the fire.
So I've learned a little bit about Case Western only in the last 4 or 5 years. I don't know how many of you know Case Western. So based in Cleveland, I believe of science and math, very STEM oriented. Did that experience and that that type of school have an impact on you directly and your leadership style, what you may have thought of once you went to Case Western in terms of what you wanted to do after?
It's probably not the science and part because I already had all that. But really, it was interesting as I looked at different MBA programs because I actually really wanted to go to Wharton. And the reason was because one of my mentors had gone to Wharton as the best business school. Okay, but there's probably some Wharton grads here. But then I was going to have to travel on the weekend and all. Whereas Case Western, I could literally see from my office, I could see down into it. It's a top 30 school. It's not by any means, Harvard, Yale, or Wharton. But interestingly, it focused more on every business school focused on certain aspects. There's some are like all totally finance focused and some are leadership focused and whatnot. And it happened to have had kind of the right mix of the business piece with a huge focus on leadership development. And that was helpful to me because as a surgeon, you were taught lots of things about leadership and they're all wrong. And so it helped me unlearn almost everything that I learned in surgical residency about leadership.
So two disciplines that typically don't go together are doctors and finance. I actually work.
It's almost apocryphal, like, how many doctors get scammed, okay?
Yeah, they actually don't generally go together. You will find that you can have the best doctor in the world, but you generally need to have like a CFO or someone who has a finance background. Are there any similarities from what you've experienced between finance, being a doctor, science?
Yeah, I think data driving decisions in either finance or medicine and science, that actually is pretty aligned. So I think in that sense, I think the most interesting class that I took in business school was actually something, I forget the title, but I remember in finance, they'd always do these models, and the bottom line is, if the number said it's above here, do this, and if it was below there, don't do that. And then in I was going like, well, that's a pretty close decision there. And in strategy, it was all kind of theoretical, and you're kind of trying, and then you're going to make this right decision, but you're not really understanding the full financial impact. But when you force it back all together, there is that deep data-driven piece, and then there's something in there where you got to go, there's some gut here, and there's some what I believe can happen. There's some ability to adjust the variables in one scenario versus another when you're making two choices there. And so I think it really helped me to tie the data driving to get to a decision point and then having the courage then to actually just make the right decision. Well, make what you hope is the right decision.
So you're the chair, and you're also going back to school. I mean, how difficult was that? Your kids are out of the house, so hopefully that helped a little bit. But
yeah. I had a coach. As a new chair, they gave me a coach, a wonderful woman. Had a great relationship.
I've had an
with
executive coach before, almost like a therapist mostly, but yeah, totally get it.
She served that function not uncommonly. And so, I'm a few months in, and at some point I'm like, Kathleen, this is just kicking my backside. and she looks up and she goes, okay, you're department chair, you got a busy clinical practice, you're going to business school. What the hell did you think was going to happen? And it was like totally no therapy there. It's just like, suck it up. And it was kind of one of those moments like, good point. And I just sucked it up and got through.
So clearly Cleveland Clinic had a lot invested in you. They send you back to school. They've given you an executive coach. You're the chair of the division. You had to have had thoughts that you were going to become potentially the next CEO of Cleveland Clinics. What happened and how you end up here?
Yeah, interestingly, so my dream job actually, and this is one of those things I think is important, every time something didn't happen for me, something better happened, which sounds Pollyannish when I say it. It's kind of like, okay, it's always going to be. No, sometimes it really sucks to not get your way. But there were times, so for example, that boss had named me as his successor. And what I did, I knew at the time he had some health issues. What I didn't know is that 6 weeks later, I think it was, I carried his casket. And so the bad thing about when someone names you the successor is the moment their casket goes in the ground, they don't have a vote. And so I actually did not get the role that I thought was my next role. And it was devastating. I was like, my career's over. Might as well go back and work on the farm. And it was really very difficult. And I will acknowledge it took me a couple of years to kind of really get beyond that. I mean, I did my job, stayed there, everything's fine. And in fact, one person came to me after that and says, why are you so unhappy with this? You still have the same job you had. I said, no, I don't. I had a job that had that next job. Now I got a job that doesn't have that next job, because that person who's got that job is like 2 years older than me. But in that circumstance, by the way, in that transition, I, to this day, disagree with the choice. Don't have any doubt about it. I think that was the wrong choice for the organization to make. But when he was announced, I was in the front row, and I stood up first to make sure that other people stood up and said, we're giving a standing ovation to our next boss. Still disagree with it, but I think it was important of you, you need to be that in that moment. A couple years later, I actually was then recruited to get out into running the hospitals. And David Bronson, who's one of the great giants in medicine, he's a mentor of mine. And David had, for about a year, we'd see each other in some meeting. He'd go like, you need to come out and work with us. And I'd go like, what does that mean? And finally, at some point, he actually made me an offer to bring me out and do that work. And Mark Harrison, who is now with General Catalyst, he was CEO of Intermountain until recently, is one of my oldest and best friends. And we had a beer, and he asked me about it. And I said, well, what would you do? Would you go out and do this? Because they're asking me to go from department chair, kind of one of the most secure jobs there is in healthcare. It's like really hard to get fired as department chair. I mean, you have to like do something really bad. Making a decent living, you got a decent title and all that. And then now they're asking to basically go out and learn a completely different part of the business with no guarantees. It's like, who knows what the next job will be? There's a number of things it might be. There's lots of turnover in any health system, but who knows what it'll be. So it was a huge risk proposition. And Mark gave me some of the best career advice that he could have given me, and I often ask executives when I'm having this conversation. I may have had the conversation with Sage at some point. He said, if you can accept the fact that your current job is the last comfortable job you'll ever have, you should do it. You'll have fun, big challenges. You'll learn more than you could possibly imagine. But if you can't accept that this is the last comfortable job you'll ever have, you shouldn't take this next job. And as it turned out, my youngest had just graduated college, and I thought, what's the worst that happens? I can go back to the farm if I have to. And so I took that leap based on knowing that it would be the last comfortable job I would have. But what it meant was there's no guardrails. Now you're out there on your own. And so there were a couple other times where something that I wanted didn't happen, and again, better job came along. When, though, there was a CEO transition at Cleveland Clinic. And yes, because of my title, I was listed in the paper as one of the potential candidates. There were two candidates, and I went to the board chair, who was a good friend. So, look, I get this. Paper can say whatever they want. I am not a candidate for this role, and frankly, never wanted to be CEO of a health system. And I really, sometimes people say, oh, I never really wanted it. No, I really never wanted that role. So I never had any dream that I would want to be a CEO of a health system at that time.
So how old were you at this point? When you're running the hospital system for Cleveland Clinics, how old were you at that point? And now you're taking a different path. Yeah. You decided you're going to take on a little more risk than the current job you're in as the chair of the division. How old are you?
Probably mid-50s.
Okay. I'm mid-50, almost. I'm just thinking for myself exactly where you might have been in your headspace at that time, because largely, when you get to that point, they've invested in you so heavily. You take a step back. Was there anyone outside of your mentorship, at work who helped you get through that transition? And then ultimately to see yourself through to get to become the CEO of Inova Health Systems?
Which transition are you referring to?
So the transition from you becoming the head of the hospital system for Cleveland Clinic, and then ultimately coming here.
Yeah, so I was in what I had told Kathleen, my coach, was my terminal job. I was happy. I got to, at that point, I had a lot of authority, got to basically run essentially everything in Ohio. which was the good part of the business to begin with. We lived right up against Lake Erie, so it was like, which people think Lake Erie, how could you enjoy that? If you haven't been there, it's like being in the Mediterranean.
Until now, you've got like 3 feet of snow there right now. I think. Yeah.
Well, there is that. But even when it's snowing, it's like really cool. You're in the fireplace. You're watching the storms come off the lake. Your wife's happy, which is kind of one of those things. It's kind of a good thing for a person to have. And so I had no intention of leaving. And again, I thought that being a CEO sounds like the worst job in the world. Why would anyone really want all that headache? Because, yeah, you get a few things more. Your pay goes up when you become CEO. But boy, of all the things, the trade-offs, I literally at that point had zero consideration that I would ever want to do that, which sounds naive. I literally never crossed my mind. And I got a call. I was with a colleague, got a call, and the recruiter said, literally like, what? I can't hear you. Call me back tomorrow. They called and they said there's a job in healthcare. We think the CEO has not announced that he's going to be stepping down. Board's asked us to gather a small slate of candidates. From everything we know about you, you look like you're the perfect candidate for this job. So we want you to apply for this job. Apparently, they had told that to about 200 other people. I said I'm naive, okay. But so I literally go home and talk to my wife. I still can see it to this day. Sat there watching the sun set into Lake Erie, having a glass of Chardonnay, and saying, "Hey, honey, you want to change all this?" You know. And so we agreed that realistically there were only literally like 3 places in the country that we would even like look. And I told the recruiter, "Don't call back unless it's like phenomenal place. We're not going to the middle of, I won't tell you where." I said, "I'm not going back to Arkansas." But we had always loved DC. And actually, interestingly, so when I was an academic urologist, I remember actually being here in the district on that beautiful fall day in the district that just the sun's out and you're walking by the monuments, it's phenomenal. And I remember thinking, it's a shame there will never be a job here. I love this city, but there will never be a job here. I'm a department chair at Cleveland Clinic. There's not a department in DC that would even be commensurate, let alone a step up. And so I'd like written it off. But life changed. Suddenly something was totally off the radar. Now there was a job here. So when they called back and they said, yes, it's in Northern Virginia, I used another bad word and I said, now I have to waste a day, go talk to these folks. I said I'd be willing to do it. So I fly in for an hour, conversation with the board, and basically fell in love.
So during that conversation, the prior CEO had just purchased over 100 acres of land. ExxonMobil was the campus that you ultimately moved into. What was the vision, and what were your thoughts when you saw how massive the opportunity? For me personally, I'm just thinking like a massive opportunity just because of the size and the scope of what Inova could be. But what was it about the opportunity that you saw that you wanted to come here to Northern Virginia and to be in the greater Washington market?
Well, first of all, I'll say it had nothing to do with that property. Which may have been, someone else may have looked at it as the best part of the job. I looked at that, if I'm candid and will couch my words, as a distraction to what really the important work was. Now, by the way, had not been purchased. That property had not been purchased. It had been leased with a put, which at the time, and the put was such that it basically forced the purchase eventually because the put was arranged in a way that
You had to buy it.
yeah, well, they had to put it because it would have been painful for them not to put it on us. So that put came forward in March of 2020. So I wake up.
During COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not great timing for the put. $280 million.
Well, right before COVID, actually.
It was right after
Right.
COVID.
Yeah.
Literally like 2 weeks into COVID.
Yeah.
One of my folks walks down the hall and goes, "Oh, by the way, showed up for $280 million. We were $100 million behind every month." So do that math, $100 million behind every month. It gets to be a big number quickly. And now 280 shows up on her. To their credit, Exxon gave us 3 months. That gave us some time to stabilize or whatnot. But that was actually the interesting thing about that transaction. But the property actually, to me, originally was envisioned as a potential development, all these things that might go on it. Well, realistically, that all looked really good on paper. Through your role with Fairfax County, you probably understand, actually not at all viable, and the economic model, there was zero chance that it could could pencil out to develop that whole property in that way. So after looking at it 15 different ways, I decided not to pursue some of the things that were envisioned. And it ties to, though, what the more important thing was, that at Inova, what I saw, our opportunity was our ace in the hole is incredible clinical care. And so I was at Cleveland Clinic, a place that's known for pretty decent clinical care. In fact, when I approached her with that, as the sun's about to come down to the water, she says, I'm not going anywhere. We're getting at the age where we're going to need health. I'm not going anywhere unless I know that we're going to have this level of health care. And so when I came to Inova and fell in love, I saw that indeed we had that. We had that care right here that I could compare to any place I'd ever been, whether it be worked or been a visiting professor or any of the places I've gone, which are most of the places in the country. I saw that clinical care here. So when I saw we can do a lot of other shiny things, or we can deliver incredible, really second to none clinical care, that's what I saw our opportunity was, which ties back then to the property of that property. There's a lot of people here who are probably really good developer type people. We're not on that list, but we can provide better care than anybody, and so we leaned into what we're better at, and so we use that property basically to provide clinical care.
So what were your biggest challenges when you stepped into the role? You're succeeding the past CEO who had acquired / leased the land that you had. I'm going to assume that maybe the strategies were a little bit different maybe at the time when you came on board, and what's been your strategy since then?
Yeah, and I think the key is a strategy is good or bad depending on its context and timing. So Inova had a phenomenal strategy that was highly successful for a long time, and I am a beneficiary of that success because they set us up for success. But the future was not, we weren't heading towards the past, we were heading towards the future. Mm-hmm. And I didn't see that many of those things that had led us to get there would get us to where we needed to be in the future. So we did indeed make a relatively straight pivot or strong pivot, total focus on excellence in clinical care, not let ourselves get distracted by any of the other things, whether it be land development or drug discovery. That was a program that we discontinued. We discontinued our accelerator and some of the other things that are kind of great sexy headlines. We were going to double down on, or whatever the right word would be, on delivering incredible care, because that's our core business. It's, if you go back to the James Collins, what drives your economic engine? It's clinical care. What are we passionate about?
And maybe describe clinical care for us a little bit. What exactly does that mean when you say clinical care?
Yeah, it's literally all the health care that you all get, whether it be from the primary care you get when you just need to have your blood pressures maintained, to the most complex cardiac care when you're literally going to die if we don't get some things right that often don't go right, mm-hmm. and that people frequently die of. It's literally that entire spectrum.
And do you associate any of that with your experience you had with your grandfather? I mean, you talked about the customized care, like he was the 1% that was on, that ended up on the third floor. Do you think that a better clinical care for him would have resulted in something different? Is that ultimately your aim for each person that comes through your doors?
I think it probably affects it, but I don't, in his circumstance, there were things that we know now, again, through some research that I was involved in, and many others, that we just couldn't have known back then. So I don't think it was that people didn't do the right thing. They just didn't know the science yet. Mm-hmm. By the way, science doesn't change. It's just our understanding of science actually changes. Mm-hmm. And so, but certainly we focus very much on a relationship with our patients. We believe that and by the way, with our team members, that we believe it's about having a relationship, that when we know that people count on us for whatever it is, that from the simple to the most complex, that's a competitive advantage for us. It lets us get better. And by the way, we do the exact same thing with our own team members. We call our employees team members. We want people to imagine that they can't, or to not be able to imagine working somewhere else. And we believe that that's good for lots of things, including the right thing to do, but it also drives our business. It drives our outcomes. If I had one single metric that I'm allowed to manage the organization with, it wouldn't be finances. It wouldn't be some of those other things you might think. It would be turnover, because people vote with their feet. If your turnover is low, which ours is literally, to my knowledge, the lowest in the industry, it means that people have decided that they see themselves working there. That's good. It reduces the cost of your replacing all of them. It reduces the risk that you have when people don't actually know how to work together in teams. So it drives every other thing downstream that we think is the key to our success.
That's great. How many employees do you have?
Over 24,000.
24,000 employees. It's a lot. And you mentioned 2020, March of 2020. Were there any things that you talked a little bit about strategy? The strategy was a little bit, you had to pivot because you knew that whatever you were doing in the past was not going to necessarily be successful in the future. Was there anything around COVID that changed your strategy in terms of how you, operate the hospital system, what you brought to your patients, how you enveloped your workforce to maintain them and to sustain them and to keep them on board?
With tactics, lots of things that we changed. But with our strategy, we actually a couple of times went back and said, are we really clear? Is our strategy right? Our vision and values correct? And interestingly, I've never wavered on what we set in place literally right out of the gate is what makes sense for us through COVID, through other, the challenges of the last couple of years. And I think really for beyond when I'm going to be CEO of the organization, when we focused on that clinical care, we're very intentional on our mission statement. Every place has a mission statement. Can you all recite your mission statement? Most can't. Our mission at Inova is to provide world-class healthcare. Every time, every touch, to each person in every community we have the privilege to serve. There's a lot in there, but each one of those words was intentionally chosen. So you go back to COVID, world-class healthcare. So when we looked at others who were, having mortality from COVID at levels way beyond ours, we focused on providing world-class healthcare. We focused on our people. We focused on our community, and that's driven everything downstream. And when I make any decision, as trite as it sounds, if I go back this afternoon and someone says, okay, should we, buy whatever, it will immediately go through that lens. And if it doesn't allow us to do that, then we don't end up doing it. So I'm shocked at how much the strategy we put in place has not only survived all the challenges that we've seen, but actually has become more important, has become more clear through the challenges we've seen.
So our chief medical officer for PNC Bank was from Inova Hospital. Dr. Ramirez, we had him for about a 2 to 3 year period. I'm not sure if this is inbred in the culture that you have with your folks, but I mean, unbelievably transparent. He used language that we could all understand. And he was a guiding light. There were no edicts in how he talked to us as a workforce, but he gave us what he thought was the best to get through a period that was very uncertain. So if you had any influence on that, thank you.
I hope I did, but I don't know. but it's certainly consistent with what we would expect.
So I'm going to open it up to the floor here in a few minutes, but I thought I would ask you in closing, so you've been on the job for about 7 years. You clearly had a vision when you came on board. You were disappointed by not becoming the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic. What are the...
No, not by not becoming CEO. That one I didn't want.
Oh, you did not want that one.
Right.
But you wanted...
Yeah, I wanted to have actually, originally my biggest goal was to have led all of the urology and kidney, which now is a markedly smaller job. But that's what I thought my terminal job would be 12 years ago.
So 7 years into the job you said you didn't want, which is the CEO of any organization. What do you feel like you've succeeded at in your last 7 years, and what would you say? What inning are you in terms of executing on your long-term vision and plan?
Well, the board probably determines which inning. I would give them some thoughts on it for sure. And so I think that we have successfully become a different organization. We have become an organization purely focused on patient care, being the best employer or the best place for physicians to provide their care. I think we see that measurably. We are a number of internal metrics that I won't necessarily share publicly, all would be consistent with that. We've almost doubled in size with almost all organic growth. We had a conversation earlier on, merger and acquisition. Many members of our industry have grown purely through merger and acquisition. And it's not a bad strategy, but it's not the one that we chose. We chose to focus on excellence and organic growth. So growing 10, 12% year over year consistently through that period of time, when most of the industry is growing 3, 4%, we think is shows that indeed we've done that. As far as where in the game that we are, I certainly don't plan to go anywhere anytime soon. I actually am contracted through, I'm 64 right now, contracted through my 70th birthday. I can't imagine that I'm going to want to step down 6 years from now. I'm having too much fun, and I hope making too much impact for me to think that that would happen. The board may have a different view, and at some point we will agree on when that would be, but I sure hope it's not anytime too quickly.
So in our business, we oftentimes measure the success of the organization by branch locations, of which we have a lot here. I mean, visibly, I would say Inova appears to have just taken over the market. I mean, you have a new space that's going to be at Landmark. Clearly the campus that you have in Falls Church. Are there any more expansion plans that you have in place?
Yeah, the biggest really relates to the Landmark. One, when I came to Inova, they told me that Inova Alexandria Hospital is an old building and you're going to have to replace it. Literally, they said that. Now, I said, look, I got 100-year-old elevators in Cleveland, so you guys don't know what you mean. And after looking at it every which way but Sunday, there was no way to replace, or to basically make Inova Alexandria Hospital be the hospital that our patients deserve to be cared in physically. The care there is phenomenal, immeasurably phenomenal, but the facility is subpar. I actually had a pretty strong commitment to try to replace it in the jurisdiction of Alexandria, which I'll admit is mostly political. No jurisdiction wants to see their hospital leave. So I knew that that's something I needed to try to accomplish. And so I sent our real estate guy out driving every weekend, go check some other place. There's some place that you could tear down and rebuild. And literally there was no place in the jurisdiction of Alexandria that could accommodate having that happen. Now, you might say the whole Landmark Mall could have, but that wouldn't pencil out for the other partners that had to be involved, for the city of Alexandria, for Folger Pratt, our partner, for the other owners. The one way to make all that come together was to give us enough land, lease us enough land to do what we needed to have a real presence there in Alexandria, and then have them be able to actually have a viable model so everybody could actually make it successful. They're all, including the city, or businesses. What that meant was, though, that we needed to have a second site for part of that work. Springfield, Franconia, we actually have, we take care of that whole community anyway. And so you might say, well, why do you want to put a place out there? They already come to you. Well, we think we can do better by taking care of that community in their community for the things that make sense in their community. So we're going to be able to take patients that currently go to Alexandria Hospital or Inova Fairfax Hospital and have them be cared for in Springfield. But we're not going to be doing some of the more complex things there. We're going to focus those things where we know that we can provide the best care. And it ties, by the way, to, in healthcare, experience matters. How much you do of something really matters. So we had a low volume open heart surgery program at Inova Alexandria Hospital that they closed about 6 months before I came. And I thank them, because I would have closed it the first day I came, because we want to concentrate that really complex care where it's a life and death decision. We will make a commitment. We'll do it at the highest level, or we won't do it at all. And so we won't do some things at Springfield that we will do at Landmark.
Excellent. So I'm going to open it up to the floor for questions. We have a mic coming from the back. There we go.
Hi, thank you so much for your time. What you described that you are pursuing at Inova is operational excellence. And so I'm interested, as a leader, how you counsel other leaders who currently are facing the decision whether or not to pursue operational excellence or to keep the wheels on the bus, and who may be using the excuse, we just don't have the time to do X.
I think that is a really delicate balance, and Sage will tell you I'm not very good at it, by the way, because I'll always say the answer is both. But I think that it is dangerous to make the assumption that we just have to keep things going so we can't make them better. And I think you actually have to do both. So focus is the one thing I'm really terrible at doing, by the way. But I think you have to do both of those, because if you don't, you sacrifice your future by not driving to that operational excellence. I think that requires the leader to continue to put the expectations on and hold accountability and hold feet to the fire and keep driving the team to do that. And my observation is that, I don't know if I'm just fortunate to work for the best people on the planet, I think I probably am, but that when I ask them, we've got to do it better, we've got to push it further because our patients deserve it, I can't tell you a time where I looked up and go like, man, they couldn't do that. And again, it sounds Pollyannish when I say it, but if you have really good people, which, sorry, we have better people than any of you employ, I want you to know that, I guarantee you. And you just make it clear, we believe in you, and make clear what good looks like, by the way. I've seen them consistently be able to do it, because if they don't do it, then in X number of years, just getting along actually has been a path down.
Good morning. For AI, it's changing the landscape in every industry. What do you believe AI's greatest impact will be on healthcare over the next 5 years?
I think so. The targets in healthcare are innumerable. Most of the headlines get attributed to things like diagnostics, and there's no doubt we have some things in diagnostics like imaging, dermatology, ophthalmology, some things that where you're looking at an image and then pattern recognition matters. Not hard to figure out that would be an easy place to apply it. And we have real world places where we're doing that right now. I think the bigger places for us are going to be in a couple of areas. One would be back office things, the things that actually you don't need clinical excellence on. So we will not ever sacrifice on delivering the very best clinical care. But if we can get technology to replace some of the back office functions, revenue cycle and billing and some of those things, I see that as being able to take away a lot of the cost. And by the way, that's not overly rewarding work. Taking away a cardiologist his wife's a cardiologist, who is able to look a person in the eye and care for him, taking away that work, you don't want to take away that work. But taking away those menial things that people don't actually like to do anyway, I think is a big opportunity in healthcare. The other place right now, real world, is we're using it for documentation. We've got, believe it or not, the voice recognition AI now is so good that it can construct a doctor note that's better than I can construct a doctor note.
We've reached our time.
No, that's actually set for an hour supposed to be set for an hour from now, actually. But taking away doctors pecking on computers, I'm highly motivated for. Let doctors actually do what they do. Think, care, give comfort to those, and intervene when they've got problems that can be intervened on. That's what I want my doctors and my other clinicians doing.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Jones. My brothers and my sons out the Blue Hospital, Alexandria, and glad it's staying in Alexandria. My question is about well-being and emotional well-being and how that relates to healthcare. If I may say something a little controversial, procedures, procedures, AI, techniques, 20-minute appointments, 5-minute appointments. How does emotional well-being and the sort of mind-body piece of healthcare work for you? What does it mean to you?
To clarify, for the workforce or for the patients?
For the patient, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
For the patient experience.
Yeah, no, I think it's huge. And so if we go back to, I'm going to answer your question a little bit provocative way back. If you look at my patient experience scores when I was active in clinical practice, if I ever went below the 95th percentile, I was devastated. It meant my patients weren't happy with me. Well, 95th percentile is pretty high. If you ask my residents how much time that I spent with the patients, it was actually probably, they'd go like, spends less time with the patients than most of the other doctors here. So how do you reconcile that? It's because I cared. I had a relationship with my patients. I looked them in the eye. I made them understand that I cared about them and that it's not about I can sit in front of them and type on a computer for 30 minutes. It's that I can care for them as human beings. So I think that would be the most important answer to your question. I think where we in healthcare get in the way of that is all the other garbage. When we, focus on people required to fill out forms or people to, have certain slots, that's where I think we get in the way of that human connection. If we can get to the human connection and see that individual in the room with us, then I think that we can focus on the part that you're referring to there most effectively. It's not about the procedures and the whir. It's about seeing that individual and having them heard, valued, and helped.
We have time for 2 more questions. We have 2 more. Yep. Good.
Thank you for the last answer. And that kind of reminded me about what you were talking about earlier with your grandfather and how that experience really informed your personal approach to care and healthcare. And I also found it interesting how earlier you were talking about your experience in business school and how it made you realize that medicine is more of an ecosystem than it is visiting patient to patient. And I just wanted to know, from your position in your leadership role, from a top-down perspective, how do you reconcile those 2 perspectives of, one being the personal attention and the other being the community? I know earlier you were talking about with Innova's expansion into Franconia, or serving that community, you want to create something that serves the issues that people go through in that community. But how do you deploy an approach like that at scale?
I think the most important answer to your question is culture. And so if I made any big bet at Innova, it was actually on culture. Now, we actually committed to patient care, but we believe culture is the key driver of that. And culture is basically what happens when people don't have someone telling them what to do. So that if indeed you get it such that all the people understand their role here is to take care of each other and to take care of our patients, then they'll do those things relatively organically. Yeah, the business folks have to make sure they've got the office in the right place or they got the right tools to do. But that culture that drives things that when I'm not in the room, which is, by the way, 99 point whatever percent likelihood, that's the real key, I think, to getting that at scale, because you can indeed tell everyone, okay, go in and be nice to Mrs. Smith today. When they do it naturally, then I think it feeds on itself in a good way.
Thank you for a wonderful sharing your journey. My question takes us to 2025 and beyond. And we have major changes coming in all of these health agencies that will have us all looking at healthcare, I think, very differently in terms of the direction some of the policymakers are going. I just want to hear from you, from a leadership perspective, what are your thoughts, greatest opportunities for looking at things differently, as well as challenges and concerns with some of the direction we may be going in?
So I don't know, because none of us does really know about what's to happen. I think, probably including those who are saying that they know what's about to happen. I think it's always good to rethink everything. If you go back, I went back 2 or 3 times with our strategy. Is this really right? COVID hit, is it really right? And so in this circumstance, when we see a time of change like this, I think it is healthy to take a step back and go, well, should we have this regulation? Should we have this reimbursement system? And the answer is probably, well, maybe things have evolved since we actually put these in place. Now, just saying that and then hoping for the best is not what I'm by any means I would advocate for. But I think the key is, as we see these things come up, to make sure we ask ourselves the question. There's an old philosopher from thousands of years ago that I forget who it is, but that always said, it's always good to be questioned, because you either then confirm that you're right or you figure out you were wrong. Both of those are valuable things. So I think in the circumstance, we should lean into what good there is in making ourselves be questioned on regulations, all these things that I think you're referring to. And by the way, if the answer is yes, these are important regulations, is not throw them out because we're saying we should throw out things, but because we have looked at it, we have been honest with ourselves and think that there should be a change in there. I will acknowledge that's a significant angst with a number of these things, and no doubt that our team is actively, I've already asked our executive team, one of which is in the room here, to think through in your area, what are the ramifications of what changes are coming forward, and how do we assure that positions us not only to be successful for ourselves, but more importantly, to be successful for the patients that we have a responsibility to.
Let's have a nice round of applause for Dr. Jones. Thank you very much. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Jermaine, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Jones. No, thank you.